Right now, while you are watching this video, the middle class in America is shrinking. Not dramatically, not all at once, just slowly, quietly, like air leaking out of a tire. You don't notice until you're already on the side of the road wondering what happened. And the numbers are not subtle anymore. In 1971, 61% of Americans lived in middle-class households. Today, that number is below 50% for the first time in modern American history. More than half of the country has either moved up or, more commonly, moved down. And the pace is accelerating. The forces compressing the middle class from both sides are not slowing down. They are gaining speed. And most of the people caught inside that compression have no idea it is happening to them until it is already too late to do anything meaningful about it. This video is about understanding exactly how that happens. Not at the surface level of things are more expensive now, because that explanation tells you nothing useful, but at the deeper level of why the middle class specifically is being hollowed out, what the economic forces behind it actually are, and most importantly, what the people who are protecting themselves are doing differently from everyone else. Stay with me through this entire video, because the second half, the part about how to actually get yourself on the right side of this shift, is going to be more specific and more actionable than anything you have probably heard on this topic. But you need to understand the system first. Otherwise, the advice is just a list of things to do without any real understanding of why they work. Let's start with what the middle class actually is, because this is more complicated than most people assume, and the definition matters enormously for understanding what is happening to it. The middle class is not a fixed income number. It is a relative position. Economists generally define it as households earning between 2/3 and double the national median income. In practical terms, for 2024, that means roughly between $56,000 and $169,000 per year for a family of 3. But income alone does not define middle-class life. What actually defines it is a specific set of conditions: the ability to own a home, to educate your children, to have health care, to save for retirement, to take an occasional vacation, to absorb an unexpected expense without financial crisis. The income is just the mechanism. The lifestyle and the security are the actual product. And it is exactly that lifestyle and that security that are becoming increasingly inaccessible to people who would have been solidly middle class a generation ago. Because the costs of the core components of middle class life, housing, education, healthcare, and retirement have risen dramatically faster than middle class incomes over the past 4 decades. And that gap between what middle class life costs and what middle class work pays is the engine driving the compression of the middle class in America. Let's look at housing first, because it is the most visible and the most emotionally loaded component of this shift. Homeownership has historically been the foundation of middle-class wealth in America. Not just as a place to live, but as an asset that appreciates over time, that builds equity, that can be passed on to children, that provides a form of financial stability that renting simply cannot replicate. In 1980, the median home price in America was approximately $47,000. The median household income was approximately $17,000. Home costs roughly 2.7 times annual income. A middle-class family could reasonably expect to buy a home, make payments for 30 years, and own it outright by retirement, building hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity along the way. Today, the median home price in America is above $400,000. The median household income is approximately $74,000. A home now costs more than 5 times annual income. And in the major metro areas where most economic opportunity is concentrated: New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, Miami, Austin, that ratio is often 8, 10, or even 12 times annual income. The mathematical reality is that a middle-class income, in most of the places where middle-class jobs exist, can no longer reliably purchase middle-class housing. This is not a temporary disruption. It is a structural shift that has been building for decades. And it means that one of the primary mechanisms by which middle-class families built wealth, buying a home, building equity, passing it on, is becoming inaccessible to a growing portion of the people who would previously have been able to use it. Now let's talk about education, because this is a second pillar of middle-class life that is being hollowed out in real time. The promise of education as a path to middle-class stability has been central to the American narrative for generations. You work hard, you go to college, you get a good job, you build a stable life. That promise is not completely broken, but it has become dramatically more expensive, more uncertain, and more dependent on making exactly the right choices at 18 years old than it has ever been before. In 1980, the average annual cost of a 4-year public university was approximately $3,500 in today's dollars. Today, that same education costs an average of $27,000 per year, including room and board. Private universities average over $55,000 per year. Total student loan debt in America has crossed $1.7 trillion, a number so large it is almost impossible to visualize. And here is the part that makes this specifically a middle-class problem rather than a universal one. Wealthy families can pay for college outright. Low-income families often qualify for significant grant aid and financial assistance. Middle-class families earning too much to qualify for most need-based aid but not enough to pay without borrowing are caught in the middle. They take on debt. Their children take on debt. And that debt, compounding at interest rates between 5 and 8%, follows those children into their working lives, delaying home purchases, delaying retirement savings, delaying the accumulation of wealth that would allow them to replicate their parents' middle-class stability for their own children. The education debt trap is one of the most powerful mechanisms compressing the middle class from below, and it is almost perfectly designed to prevent the upward mobility that education is supposed to create. Healthcare is the third pillar, and in many ways the most insidious, because its impact on middle-class finances is both enormous and almost completely invisible, until a crisis makes it suddenly visible. The average American family with employer-sponsored health insurance pays approximately $6,000 per year in premiums. And that is just the premium, before deductibles, co-pays, and out-of-pocket expenses. Total out-of-pocket healthcare costs for a middle-class family can easily reach $10,000 to $15,000 per year in a year with any significant medical events. And medical bankruptcy, the phenomenon of a health crisis destroying a family's finances, is almost exclusively a middle-class problem, because wealthy families can absorb the costs and poor families qualify for Medicaid. Middle-class families are caught in the gap with insurance that is expensive enough to strain their budget and limited enough that a serious illness can still wipe out their savings. Healthcare costs have risen at roughly twice the rate of inflation for the past 4 decades. And unlike housing or education, where you can theoretically make different choices, rent instead of buy, choose a cheaper school, healthcare is not optional. You cannot opt out of getting sick. You cannot choose not to have a medical emergency. Which makes healthcare inflation particularly brutal for middle-class families, because it is an expense that grows relentlessly and cannot be avoided or deferred. Now, let's connect all of this to what is actually happening at the macro level, because housing, education, and healthcare are symptoms of a deeper structural shift that is fundamentally changing what middle-class life means and who can access it. For most of the 20th century, productivity gains, the increases in how much an economy produces per worker, were shared relatively broadly across the income distribution. When the economy became more productive, workers across the income spectrum saw their wages rise. The middle class expanded because the gains from economic growth were distributed widely enough to pull people up and keep them there. Starting in the late 1970s and accelerating through the 1980s and 1990s, that relationship between productivity and wages broke down. Productivity continued to rise. American workers continued to generate more economic output per hour worked, but the gains from that productivity stopped flowing to workers across the spectrum and increasingly concentrated at the top. Corporate profits rose. Executive compensation exploded. Shareholder returns accelerated. And wages for middle-class workers, adjusted for inflation, stagnated. This is the core engine of middle-class compression. It is not that the economy stopped growing. It is that the growth stopped being shared in the way it previously was. The pie kept getting bigger, but the slices going to middle-class workers stopped growing proportionally. And as the costs of middle-class life, housing, education, healthcare continued rising, the stagnating wages meant that more and more families found themselves running harder just to stay in place. So what do the people who are successfully navigating this shift actually doing differently? Because the story of the disappearing middle class is real, and the forces driving it are powerful, but they are not unstoppable at the individual level. There are specific, concrete things that people are doing to protect themselves and their families from this compression, and they are worth understanding in detail. The first thing is asset accumulation over income maximization. The middle class historically relied on income wages from employment as the primary source of financial stability. But wages are exactly what has stagnated. The people who are staying ahead of middle class compression are the ones who have shifted their focus from maximizing their income to accumulating assets that generate returns independent of their labor. Index funds, rental properties, dividend-paying stocks, business ownership. These are assets that grow regardless of whether wages are rising. The shift from being purely a wage earner to being both a wage earner and an asset owner is the single most important financial transition a middle-class family can make. The second thing is ruthless prioritization of home ownership in markets where it is still accessible. In the most expensive markets, home ownership may genuinely be out of reach for middle-class incomes, but in secondary and tertiary markets, mid-sized cities, growing suburbs, areas with strong job markets but lower housing costs, home ownership is still achievable and still one of the most powerful wealth-building tools available. The people protecting themselves from middle-class compression are making strategic decisions about where to live based not just on job opportunities, but on the long-term financial implications of housing costs in different markets. The third thing is aggressive debt avoidance. Every dollar of high-interest debt is a dollar that is working against you instead of for you. The middle-class compression trap is deepened dramatically by consumer debt credit cards, car loans, student loans, because debt payments are fixed costs that consume income that could otherwise be accumulating into assets. The families navigating this environment successfully are the ones treating debt elimination as an investment, because the guaranteed return of eliminating a 20% credit card is better than almost any other financial move available to them. The fourth thing is income diversification. Dependence on a single employer for 100% of household income is a structural vulnerability that the environment of the last decade has made increasingly dangerous. The people protecting themselves are building secondary income streams, freelance work, side businesses, Hintao income investment returns that provide a cushion against job loss, wage stagnation, or industry disruption. Even a relatively modest secondary income of $500 to $1,000 per month dramatically changes the financial resilience of a middle-class household. The fifth thing is continuous skills investment. The labor market is changing faster than at any previous point in modern economic history, driven by automation, artificial intelligence, and globalization. The jobs that are most vulnerable to this disruption are the routine, process, middle-skilled jobs that have historically been the backbone of middle-class employment. The people staying ahead of this are the ones investing continuously in skills that are difficult to automate, complex problem-solving, creative work, relationship-intensive roles, technical expertise in growing fields. Skills depreciate. The people who treat their own skill set like an asset that requires ongoing investment are the ones who maintain their position in an increasingly competitive labor market. Let's bring everything together into something you can actually use. The middle-class bubble is not bursting overnight. It is deflating slowly, steadily, and in ways that are easy to miss until the damage is already significant. The forces driving it: stagnating wages, rising costs of housing, education, and healthcare, and the concentration of economic gains at the top are structural and long-term. They will not be reversed quickly or easily, but they are not a sentence. They are a context. And within that context, the decisions you make about assets, debt, skills, and income diversification determine whether you are among the people who get compressed by these forces, or among the people who navigate through them and come out stronger on the other side. Start accumulating assets today, even small ones. Eliminate high-interest debt before anything else. Build at least one secondary income stream. Make strategic decisions about housing that account for long-term financial implications, not just immediate lifestyle preferences. And invest in your skills continuously, because in a rapidly changing labor market, the people who stop learning are the people who get left behind. The middle class is not disappearing for everyone. It is disappearing for the people who are relying on the old playbook in a game that has fundamentally changed. Now you know what the new playbook looks like. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening to the middle class and what to do about it, hit that like button and subscribe. We post every week with content that actually helps you navigate the financial world more intelligently. Drop a comment below. Do you feel like the middle-class life your parents had is still accessible to you? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know what you think. See you in the next one.